Please won't you pray with me? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts together find their way into the heart of God this morning. Amen. If you get quiet enough, you can hear the sounds of life from our balcony, which is a beautiful sound, isn't it? And you can hear just the sound of your heart in your head. So I know he's new to all of you, but this, my friend Joel Hiller here, I almost called you Joel Miller.
I heard it.
Yeah. I also have a friend named Joel Miller, actually, so it's confusing. This is my friend Joel Hiller, though. He's new to all of you, but he's known me for a very long time because we have now served at 2 churches together across the span of 14 years. And Joel disagrees with me about a lot of things. Music choices, politics, sometimes religion, everything I post on Facebook.
That's not quite true.
But it doesn't matter because he finds me so charming and smart and hilarious, not to mention humble, that he likes me anyway, right?
Absolutely.
Yes. But because Joel has known me for so long, he feels he has permission to point out my many deficits in humorous ways. My favorite comedian, Pete Holmes, says that he loves to be roasted because it makes him feel seen, right? Joel makes me feel seen. For instance, Joel says that I refer to every person I introduce him to as amazing. And he says that that word has begun to lose any kind of meaning to him now since everyone is amazing. And recently, he told me something new. He told me that I say the words, I know, like a vocal tick. So whenever he tells me something, I immediately say, I know. This piece needs some rhythmic percussion, he says. I know, I say. This song is too hard to learn in 15 minutes, he says. I know, I say. It's cold in here, he says. I know, I say. The secrets of the universe can be summed up by the number 42. I know, I say. I know, I know, I know. I know everything. In the Apology, Plato relates that Socrates accounts for his seeming wiser than any other person because he does not imagine that he knows what he does not know. So a more commonly used translation puts it, although I do not suppose that either of us knows anything really beautiful and good, I am better off than he is, for he knows nothing and thinks he knows. I neither know nor think I know. Too many of us think we know. The world needs fewer people who know things. So as I told you, Rachel Hager has strep throat today, so I asked my daughter Eloisa to sing that song from Matilda that you just heard, and I'm so glad she did, not just because her British accent is amazing, or because I'm proud to be her mom, although both of those things are true, but because I am a follower of Jesus, and I am despairing for the state of our country this week. Everyone shouts, and they seem to like shouting. And the noise becomes anger, and the anger is light and burning inside me. And it would usually fade, but it isn't today. When I'm angry, I talk like I know. Do you do that too? So does everyone. And so there is too much talking and not enough listening, too much posturing, too much declarative pomposity, not enough curious not knowing. People have so much toxic certainty about issues that are far too complex for anyone to have any certainty at all about. We have become collectively gaslit as a country by our politicians and Russian bots and too much access to too many people we don't know on the internet. Truth is so distorted, we can't even tell what's true. So we virtue signal to collect likes in our hallowed echo chambers. We all have so much to say. The lack of collective humility takes my breath away, my own especially. There's so little quiet. So I went to yoga and laid on a mat on Friday, and I tried to turn it all off by concentrating on my breathing and stretching my body into strange contortions, and it didn't work. And then a brief moment during Shavasana.
Quiet, like silence, but not really silent. Just that nice kind of quiet, like the sound when you lie upside down in your bed. Just the sound of your heart in your head. And though the people around me, their mouths are still moving, the words they are forming cannot reach me anymore. And it is quiet, and I am warm, like I've sailed into the eye of the storm.
Today, St. Paul has got a good word for all of us in his letter to a group of Christians at Corinth who have begun a cold civil war with one another, similar to the one we've got going on in the divided states of America in 2020. In the letter we know as 1 Corinthians, Paul is speaking to a group of people who are fighting with each other because of one, elitist attitudes, and two, dissension within the ranks. Paul is asking the Corinthians to end their divisions and to be united in one mind. That's easy to do, right? It turns out the early church wasn't always so Christ-like. In this church, some folks were claiming allegiance to particular leaders, and other folks were claiming allegiance to opposing leaders. And some of the Corinthians saw themselves as theologically, morally, and spiritually superior to other Corinthian Christians. Paul's strategy was to use humility to unite them. He says in his letter that he has no desire to use a bunch of big fancy words to sum up the mystery of God. He says, I decided to know nothing among you except Christ crucified, except Jesus Christ and him crucified. I decided to know nothing. St. Paul tells us that we can unite as one body if we commit to not knowing anything but love and suffering. We can train ourselves to have the mind of Christ if we can do this. We can train our minds on joy. We can train our minds on hope. We can train our minds on peace. We can train our minds on love. I don't think it seems like Christians are thinking with their Christ minds right now. It's not because we don't have the power to. It's because in the midst of all the noise and the lack of quiet, we have forgotten how. We think using our Christ mind means knowing what Jesus would say, right? Jane just rolled her eyes. My sentiments exactly. We make Jesus into who we want him to be according to who we are, right? Jesus is a permissible friend. Jesus is a judgy foe. He is a liberal. He's a conservative. He'd vote for the person I voted for. He loves America the most of all the countries. He'd judge this war unjust. He wouldn't want gay people to have cake. He'd call all conservatives deplorable. He'd refer to all liberals as snowflakes, right? He'd want me to hold this picture of a fetus and shame women in front of Planned Parenthood. He'd like the Super Bowl halftime show. Or he wouldn't. He'd build the wall. He'd choose to go to this church and this denomination as if he wasn't Jewish. He'd love the same people I love. He'd hate the same people I hate. We talk like we know, right? I talk like I know. So if they pay me to talk like I know what Jesus would say, what a ridiculous job. And Paul says, I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. That's what St. Paul says in his letter to the church at Corinth, that warring church. That's what St. Paul says to stop the noise of division. I decided to know nothing but love and to do something about suffering. So one of my favorite poems is called I Feel Sorry for Jesus, and it's by Naomi Shihab-Nye. She writes, people won't leave him alone. I know he said wherever two or more are gathered in my name, but I bet some days he regrets it. Cozily, they tell you what he wants and doesn't want as if they just got an email. Remember telephone, that pass it on game where the message changed dramatically by the time it rounded the circle? Well, people blame terrible pieties on Jesus. They want to be his special pet. Jesus deserves better. I think he's been exhausted for a long time. He went into the desert, friends. He didn't go into the pomp. He didn't go into the golden chandeliers and say the truth tastes better here. See, I'm talking like I know. It's dangerous talking for Jesus. You get carried away almost immediately. I stood in the spot where he was born. I closed my eyes where he died and didn't die. Every twist of the Via Dolorosa was written on my skin, and that makes me feel like being silent for him, you know? A secret pouch of listening. You won't hear me mention this again. Here ends the poem. The Via Dolorosa is the path that Jesus walked to his death in Jerusalem. Bloodied and beaten, carrying a heavy cross. Via Dolorosa means the way of grief, the way of sorrow, the way of suffering, the painful way. And you and I may never have traveled to Jerusalem, but we have walked the way of sorrow, my friends, because we have known suffering, all of us. The way of sorrow is written on our skin. It makes me feel like being silent for Jesus. It makes me feel like being silent for all of us. I remember Doug Davis coming home from our medical mission trip in La Romana, Dominican Republic, a few years ago. The reason why I remember this is because he was interviewed for a video that he's really embarrassed about, because just hours after his plane landed, he was asked to do an interview about the reverse offering that we did in 2017. I had given out $5,000 to the congregation a couple of months before in different denominations of cash. I know you're all bummed if you were new that you weren't there then, right? Maybe we'll do it again someday. I gave out $5,000 and I told everybody to use it for good. And I trusted you to just do that and then come back and tell us the story. Do some of you remember this? Well, Doug was interviewed about it on camera, and he told his story about finding a Haitian woman in the sugarcane fields in the Dominican Republic who felt that she had a baby dead inside of her for the past 10 years, I believe. And he had taken the money that he had combined with his family that they had been given from the reverse offering, and he used it to give her immediate medical care for the surgery that she needed. He even got to accompany her to the hospital. You can see why he was emotional. And I just remember him weeping as he relayed the story, exhausted from the trip. He had used his Christ mind to listen, to find her on the Via Dolorosa, the path of suffering, and to accompany her there. I decided to know nothing among you, Jesus, except for Jesus Christ and him crucified. I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. Beloved, if we want to train our minds on Christ, we need to get quiet enough to remember the people who travel on the way of sorrow. We need to stop talking like we know about how to fix what's wrong and just come alongside people on the painful way. We need to be humble enough to ask, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? And then really hear the reply, not as an indictment, but as a call to action. I tell you the truth, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers, you did for me. Beloved, if you want to know anything beautiful and good, get quiet enough that you can hear the sound of your hearts in your heads. Know nothing but love. Rehumanize all that has been dehumanized. Unite all that has been divided. You know sorrow, so walk the path of sorrow with those who suffer. Every twist of the Via Dolorosa is written on your skin. There is no time but now, no people but us, and no way forward without turning toward each other. Amen.